My Hero Academia, All Grown Up. Chapter 31. Uraraka yawned from her seat in the conference room, and she stretched her arms out over the table. She glanced at her phone and found it dead, but she guessed it was nearing 2 o'clock in the morning. Bakugou was pacing the front of the room, a nervous energy surrounding him. Where the fuck are they? He grumbled and glanced out of the open door. The brunette leaned back into the plush conference room chair and shrugged. I'm sure they'll be here soon. We don't have all fucking night. He paced to the back of the room and dumped himself into the chair beside her. Uraraka didn't reply and blinked hard, trying to force herself to stay alert. The moment they'd arrived back at the Shot agency, she had only felt more exhausted. She considered going to the break room to brew a cup of coffee but decided against it, worried she would miss the meeting. Bakugou watched her as she tried to fight nodding off in her chair. The way her hair had begun to fall out of her ponytail was endearing in its own way, and she rested her chin in her hand, leaning against the arm of the chair. She resembled a tuckered-out toddler, and it stirred a pot of confusing emotions in his chest. She felt his gaze, so she turned to look at him and found him staring blankly at her. What? She asked, her eyelids drooping. He seemed surprised by her question before he remembered himself and scowled. Nothing. MHM. She hummed and smiled tiredly at him, fully aware of what he'd been doing. A knock broke their attention from each other, and they looked toward the front of the room to see Earthworm standing in the doorway. So, why exactly did you two have to drag me off patrol duty in the middle of the night? Bakugou stood up abruptly. We have a solid lead on Teller, and we need to do a raid right the fuck now. Uh-huh. The night shift hero nodded his head in mild curiosity and crossed the room to stand in front of the blonde. Tell me more. Bakugou crossed his arms and set his mouth in a thin line. There's a convenience store a little way off from here that we were tipped off to yesterday. He glanced back at Uraraka. We did a stakeout and saw some suspicious activity, so we went in for a closer look and found a few things. He pulled out his phone and unlocked it, passing it to the hero in front of him. The night shift hero lifted his face mask and scrolled through a series of photographs. These are interesting. That's a lot of quirking drugs. Bakugou pointed to the photo on the screen. And there was a ledger on the desk. He used a finger to swipe through the photos for Earthworm until it came to a snapshot of the book. Hang on. Earthworm leaned back on his heels and gave them both a questioning look. How did you get these pictures? Uraraka seemed to perk up a bit, finding an air of accusation in the senior hero's tone. Well, she glanced at Bakugou, asking a silent question with her gaze. It's not important, he replied. We need to act on this. No. Earthworm shook his head. Before we do anything, I need to know. Did you guys break into a building? Uraraka gulped nervously, but Bakugou is the one that answered. No. The door was unlocked. But the shop wasn't open? The night shift hero asked pointedly. It wasn't. Uraraka answered the question for herself and the blonde. Earthworm chuckled back at them. Come on, guys. We can't use these now. Sure we can. Bakugou frowned back. This might be our only opportunity to catch that fucking Teller piece of shit. There's 3 pallets of quirking drugs in that building. Earthworm handed the phone back. Did you see Teller himself? Maybe leaving or going inside at any point? No. Uraraka replied when his expectant gaze fell on her. But there was a lot of packaging inside. We believe that they're going to try and move all of it. And the ledger shows that Teller has been there and intends to come back. Bakugou flipped the phone around to show the photo of the book. The older hero laughed lightly. Listen, those photos are incriminating as fuck, but we can't use them unless they were obtained lawfully. He plopped down in one of the chairs around the conference table. How am I supposed to sell it to Shot and then have him sell it to the police? He held out his hands helplessly. I mean, come on guys, you know the rules. The bureaucracy needs to do its thing, and we can't just raid a building on a hunch. Uraraka glanced at the blonde, who was still standing and growing more frustrated. Well, what if we got the photos through a confidential source? The 2 men paused to consider the option, but it was Earthworm that spoke. See. That's different, but even then, the court will want the confidential source to testify later. Then we make the source anonymous. Bakugou cut in with a shrug. Then it'll be impossible. Earthworm took a deep breath. I don't know about this, guys. Shot won't like it. The police might buy it, but he won't. So we're fucked. Bakugou raked a hand through his hair, searching his brain for any other options. It was the only lead they had, and the only way they could further it was to go into the shop and see for themselves. Earthworm watched the two heroes in the room with him deflate at his response. I'll tell you what we're going to do. I'll tell Ed Shot what you guys have told me, and we'll keep a close eye on the shop. The first sign of Teller, we'll snag him. We don't have that kind of fucking time. Bakugou replied sharply. We need to move faster than that. He could already know we're onto him. There's millions of dollars worth of quirking drugs there, and we can keep that shit from getting onto the streets. That many pills getting into the wrong dash. Earthworm gave the hot-headed blonde a warning look as he interrupted him. I get it. You both have a bone to pick with Viper, and the sooner Teller goes down, the sooner we can get to him. He paused to gauge their reactions before continuing, but we can learn a lot just by watching this place for the time being. Maybe we'll get a good lead on Viper himself. Let's be smart about this. Uraraka watched as Bakugou only seemed to tense up further with irritation. Hey, she patted the spot beside her on the table. Relax. She was too tired to try any harder than that, and she gave him a gentle smile when he looked at her. It's been a long night. Let's just get this figured out, okay? Bakugou met her gaze and felt his scowl soften a little. Whatever. This is bullshit. He slouched his way toward her before dropping himself into the cushioned chair beside hers. Earthworm nodded his head at them. You guys look beat. You're not exactly a fucking 10 either. Bakugou snapped back with a deep scowl. I'm putting in extra hours dash. All right. Earthworm held up a hand and caught Uraraka giggling lightly at Bakugou's response. I didn't claim to be one. He nodded at the blonde. Send me those photos. I'll show them to Ed Shot in the morning. In the meantime, I'll station a patrol around that block. No, Bakugou responded quickly. It needs to be covert. All right. Earthworm nodded his head in recognition. I'll post a covert patrol around that block to keep an eye on things. We'll catch that son of bitch. I can feel it. We just need a strong legal lead first. Bakugou and Uraraka didn't reply as they sunk down in their chairs, the brunette wearing a defeated expression. They'd hoped that Earthworm would be able to help them, but it didn't appear that it would be that easy. Fuck, Bakugou muttered. Whatever. The night shift hero nodded at them encouragingly. Don't worry about it. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. Okay? Shut the hell up, the blonde shot back, a tired grouchiness to his tone. Go home, guys. The hero jerked his head toward the door. And come in late tomorrow. You both need some sleep. Bakugou frowned. I'm staying. No, you're going home. Earthworm jutted toward the door with his thumb. Poor Uravity looks exhausted. You're not going to make her feel bad about choosing to go home, are you? Bakugou glanced at the brunette beside him and found her giving him an expectant look. He briefly wondered why before he recalled their deal from earlier in the night. He owed her for saving him from Kirishima and Mina. Fuck, fine. Get on out of here. Earthworm nodded at the pair as they began to pull themselves out of their chairs. He watched as Bakugou lifted Uraraka's duffel off the floor and handed it to her, a silent look passing between the pair of heroes. As they moved to pass him, the night shift hero held up a hand. Actually, he turned his gaze onto Bakugou. You hang back for a second, Ground Zero. The blonde blinked down at his former night shift hero partner before glancing at the brunette. She held his gaze for a brief moment before she spoke. I guess I'll just see you downstairs. I'll see you tomorrow, Bakugou told her, hoping she understood that he would in fact meet her downstairs, but he didn't want to admit to it in front of Earthworm. A questioning look passed over her features before she sighed and turned away. Okay, I'll see you in the morning. She waved at the two as she ducked out the door. Bakugou wasn't sure if she had understood, but didn't take the time to ask himself before he glared down at the hero still seated at the table. The fuck do you want? Sit. Earthworm motioned to the chair beside him. The blonde frowned for a long moment before reluctantly dropping his duffel, taking the seat and staring hard at the night shift hero. What the fuck is it? Earthworm paused to shake his head at the blonde before speaking. All right, we worked together for a long-ass time, Bakugou. He cast a judgmental look. I know, I taught you better than to break into a fucking villain hideout to get a lead. Tisich, Bakugou rolled his eyes. It's the only lead we have. No. Earthworm slapped his hand on the tabletop. We follow the fucking rules here, and Uravity doesn't need any bad habits. We do things by the book at the Edshot Agency, and there are no exceptions. I also heard that you kept the Keyhan information to yourself until the last goddamn minute. Do you think that's how a pro hero is supposed to behave? You need to get your act together. Bakugou's face contorted into a scowl. The fuck is your problem? Bakugou, the older hero's tone didn't waver in seriousness. You're a great fighter and you're sharp as a tack, but this is rookie shit that you're doing. You need to be better than this if you ever want to break the top 10. The blonde didn't reply, opting to hold the intense gaze of his old partner and mentor instead. He knew that Earthworm was right, but it still annoyed the hell out of him. Earthworm had learned early on that tough love was the only way he ever digested any advice, so it was the only form of discipline the older hero had ever used on him. You have what it takes. Earthworm leaned forward to jam a finger against the blonde's left shoulder. You're young, you're popular with the media, and you're chock full of raw fucking talent. You have more going for you at 21 years old than I've had my entire career. I can't stand back and watch you throw it away because you want revenge on Viper. Earthworm looked hard at Bakugou, searching his features for any pushback, but was relieved to see that the blonde appeared to be listening. If you want to be a #1 hero, then you need to start behaving like one. Do shit by the book and let the job do itself. You can't get into your head all the fucking time anymore. Start thinking big picture. Fuck, I get it. Bakugou snapped back harshly, annoyed that Earthworm was beginning to rub his nose in it. It won't happen again. Earthworm released a long breath and rested his back against the chair again. Trust me when I say that I'm rooting for you, but it's time to elevate yourself. Be more than a hero. Be a leader. Bakugou didn't budge his scowl, but he appreciated the advice. You sound like All Might. The older hero clapped a hand across his chest. That is probably the highest compliment I've ever gotten as a hero, kid. Don't let it go to your head, old man. Bakugou grumbled before getting to his feet and grabbing his duffel again. He glanced down one last time as he turned toward the door. Thanks. Anytime. Earthworm twirled the chair around to watch the blonde as he got to the door. One more thing. Ground Zero. Bakugou paused in the doorway to throw back an annoyed glance. What the fuck is it? Stop sleeping with her. Earthworm gave him a pointed look. Edshot has a strict policy on interoffice relationships. A long pause passed between the two men before Bakugou's blood began to boil. What the fuck? I'm not sleeping with her. Don't start that shit with me. Earthworm chuckled knowingly. I'm sure I'm not the only one around here that's noticed you two making eyes at each other all day. She's awfully cute, so I'll give you that. We're not Dash, Bakugou started again, turning to march back in the room again, but halted when Earthworm held up a hand. Listen, the older hero's tone turned serious. Edshot does not allow heroes at his agency to get involved with one another. It's a huge liability for the agency, and he takes it very seriously. If it's nothing more than a distraction, I strongly suggest you end it before Edshot figures it out, or worse, the media. He breathed a short sigh. But if it's not a distraction, then you need to fess up now, and one of you will have to transfer. Bakugou felt his face flush angrily. I don't know what the fuck you've heard, but Uraraka and I aren't involved with each other. His heart rate picked up in his chest at the prospect of Earthworm's new information, and he didn't know how to control it. Fine. Maybe I have it all wrong. The older hero shrugged in disinterest before giving the blonde a warning glance. But if I'm right and you don't do anything about it, you both will pay for it. This is one of those things that you can't ignore. Bakugou didn't dignify Earthworm with a response and simply stormed out of the room. He blew down the hallway, a mess of emotions filling his chest. Concern, confusion, and outrage were the primary ones competing for control. By the time he exited the agency, he was seeing red, and he glanced around the area wildly, searching for a familiar face that he never found. Fucking really? He growled to himself when he realized that Uraraka had left to go home. He had hoped she would wait for him so he could help her like he promised, but perhaps she hadn't gotten the message when Earthworm had asked the blonde to stay back. He turned in the direction of her apartment and began walking, running through the conversation in his mind. Earthworm had made some good points, and it was downright infuriating. If what he said was true regarding his relationship to Uraraka, then he didn't know what to think about it, much less what to do about it. It was obvious that he had developed some problematic feelings for the brunette that had dominated his attention for the last few months. Uraraka was an astonishing woman that impressed him and made him feel stupid at the same time. She came to Tokyo timidly, but she overcame the obstacles that got in her way, one by one. She had hung Deku out to dry. She'd handled a major battle that resulted in the near dismantling of the Mamushi group, and she had bounced back from a major injury in record time. Bakugou knew she had guts, but even he was surprised by her ability to breeze through her problems. She was a one-woman machine that had made her hero name a household name in a few short months since she arrived in the city. But that wasn't even scratching the surface of his issue. He liked her, and it was driving him crazy. She had a way about her that made him feel like she left sparkles on everything she touched. She smiled when there was nothing to smile about. She talks in her sleep. She can't cook to save her life, and she has a deep appreciation and love for the people in her life. He never wanted to tear himself away from her, not even for work, and he hated that. Yet, he always found himself going back for more of her. However, their problem remains. She needed the job at the Edgeshot agency, and so did he. It was the most prestigious agency in all of Tokyo and had all the resources an up-and-coming hero needed in order to succeed. The only agency that was comparable was Endeavor's agency in Kyoto, and there was no way either of them would be willing to surrender their spot at the Edgeshot agency for a job in a whole new city. It simply wasn't feasible, especially with a Viper case on their hands. They both needed that win. So where did that leave them? He was standing outside the door of Uraraka's apartment asking himself that question when she propped open the door with curious eyes. "Oh, hey Bakugou. I thought you said you were going home." "We had a deal," he grumbled and pushed his way through the door. "Where is it?" The brunette rubbed her eye as she glanced at the time on her oven clock. "It's 3 in the morning. Don't you think it's a little too late for that?" She couldn't stop the yawn that took over halfway through her sentence. He paused as she shut the door behind him, and he kicked off his shoes. "Whatever, fine." "Hey." She blinked at him, sensing that he seemed distracted. "What happened?" He looked away from her. The words earthworm had told him replaying in his head. Part of him knew he should tell her right away, but he couldn't find it within himself to look at her. Nothing. Uraraka felt that he wasn't being honest with her, so she wandered toward him to trace her finger over his upper arm and give him a gentle look. "It's all right. You can trust me." "TCH." He swiped her hand away without any force. "I'll just go home if you want to sleep." Uraraka had learned a long time ago that his coldness was a defense mechanism, and she didn't let it deter her efforts. "It's 3 in the morning. Just stay here." His shoulders relaxed at her kindness, and he felt supremely guilty as he simply nodded his head. He allowed her to take his hand carefully and lead him toward her bedroom, and he blinked at the mess inside. Her mattress had been dragged into the middle of the floor. Pieces of her new bed frame were scattered throughout the room. "Fuck," he muttered at the sight. "You're useless against furniture." She shrugged and giggled softly. "My greatest nemesis." She released his hand and toppled onto the left side of the bed. Her sheets were haphazardly thrown on, giving the impression of temporary laziness. "Come on." She patted the spot beside her. "My bed isn't nearly as comfortable as yours, but I think it'll do for tonight." Bakugou dumped the duffel bag he was still carrying inside the doorway before stripping down to just his t-shirt and boxers. He switched off the light and carefully sunk down on the mattress beside her and rested his head against the pillow. "Hey," she murmured after a moment of silence, and her hands reached over to him, pulling him closer. His head came to rest near her chest, and she threaded her fingers through his hair, carefully pulling and giving him comforting tickles with her fingernails. "Tell me what's going on." He sighed reluctantly, allowing her gentle fingers to soothe the angry shouts in his mind. "Humph." Uraraka frowned slightly as she casually played with his thick ashen spikes. Something was stressing him out, and it worried her that he wouldn't divulge what it was. She considered pressing harder, but on second thought, she decided that she wouldn't force it. Clearly, he didn't want to talk about it, so she fell into the role of comforting him. She mindlessly scratched his head and pulled gently on tufts of coarse blonde hair until she felt him shift on the bed. His arms wrapped around her torso and pulled her down beside him, a sleepy grumble resonating from his chest. She pushed a few humored breaths from her nose when she felt his nose lazily rub its way up her neck to her jawline. "You smell good." His lips tickled her skin, causing her to squirm just a little. "I showered before the stakeout," Uraraka whispered her reply, a playful smile on her lips. He grumbled sleepily, "I like it." She blushed madly at his tired response and giggled quietly. "Good." Her heart picked up speed in her chest, an anxious anticipation beginning to work its way up her spine. His hands felt their way under her shirt on her back, resting warm palms on her cool skin, and he murmured something incoherent against her neck, a hot breath following closely after. He smiled through the darkness when he felt her shift in his hold, pressing herself closer to him and gasping a nearly silent breath. The way she responded to him only spurred his wandering hands. He slowly felt his way up her back, his wrists hiking up her shirt as they went. He felt one of her legs work its way between his knees, and he mirrored her movement, tangling them together under the sheet. Her hands dug into his hair, pulling his face toward hers before she tenderly kissed him with a gratified sigh. His hands only picked up speed once their lips met, feeling the curves of her hips and traveling up her sides before moving to her shoulder blades. He grinned on her lips as her shirt slid all the way up to her shoulders, freeing her naked chest and allowing his hands to wander more. He loved her body. She was strong and toned, but she retained a femininity that drove him wild. Her waist was tight with muscles, but her hips were thick and smooth. Her chest was well-proportioned and perky while her shoulders had been carefully toned with hours in the gym. But his favorite feature was her thighs. He couldn't explain why, but he not only loved to look at them, he also went nuts when she'd wrap them around him. A perfect woman that he never got enough of. Uraraka gasped when he tore his lips from hers to kiss down her neck, rolling them over. So, he was on top. She immediately began feeling her way down his chest, taking extra time to trace the muscles on his abdomen before dropping lower. He pulled himself back, sitting upright as he straddled her and gazed down. She had a subdued expression, and he had to breathe in sharply as her fingers teasingly traced over his boxers. He snatched her wrists with a cocky grin, relishing the look on her face when he slowly slid her hands over her head, pinning them near the edge of the mattress. She allowed him to do it, feeling a shift in their sexual chemistry that excited her. She bit her lip as she held his shadowed gaze, a silent dare between them. "Keep those there," Bakugou murmured and released her wrists, moving his hands to slide up her sides toward her breasts. In anticipation of his touch, they perked up on their own, and goosebumps kissed her skin. He couldn't stop the playful smirk on his lips as he reached them, giving them a soft squeeze before he leaned down. Uraraka released a long breath she didn't know she was holding as he began to kiss down her body. He was slow and deliberate, leaving a soft trail from her jaw before heading downward between her breasts and lazily over her stomach. She had to consciously remember to keep her hands in place as her back arched up and a nearly silent moan passed her lips. She squirmed when his teeth gently nipped the skin on her hips where her pajama shorts started. He shifted his weight, and Uraraka opened her eyes to see him sit on his knees between her legs. He met her eyes and held them as he began to pull her shorts and underwear off with terribly slow movements. In an effort to hurry him, she moved her right hand down to help push them off her legs. "Nuh-uh." Bakugou swatted her hand away, giving her an intensely sexy look. "What did I say?" Uraraka blushed madly, letting her hand hover in the air for a long moment before she slowly moved it back to its place above her head. Once she was in place again, she couldn't help but flush and squeeze her eyes shut in anticipation, her shorts finally off her body, and she was mostly naked except for the shirt pushed up to her shoulders. Bakugou admired her for a long moment as his fingers mindlessly tickled their way up her inner thighs. She was stretched out on the mattress in front of him, and the sight made him feel hot and insatiably turned on. Uraraka felt his hands leave her, and she waited for what felt like an hour before his thumb pressed against her wetness, causing a short squeal to pass her lips. She grabbed onto the top edge of the mattress tightly and held it, letting herself succumb to his touch. He carefully played with her, taking his time to elicit moans and sighs of pleasure. He could see the muscles in her abdomen tighten and relax as he went, and her legs tensed, lifting her knees up as her heels dug into the mattress. By the time he pressed a finger through her entrance, she blinked her eyes open to give him a breathless look. He held it, a slight smirk twitching the corner of his mouth as he slid further down the bed until his mouth disappeared between her legs. The view of her body as he pressed his mouth to her drove him wild. Her back arched sharply, and her hips pressed down hard. A strangled moan escaped her, and her legs tensed on either side of him. He gently kissed her wetness, seeking out the small area that drove her mad as his finger began to casually slide in and out of her. He held the slow pace and let her gradually grow more desperate until he finally found what he was looking for. Huh. Uraraka gasped loudly, and her entire body went taut, her hips pressing down hard on the mattress. Bakugou felt her tighten around his finger as he continued to work her with his mouth. She shuddered around him, her legs twitching and her entire body seemed to relax at once. Oh, Uraraka moaned with a needy whine as she rode out the tail of her orgasm. She tensed as she felt his fingers slip out of her and his mouth retreated. She was white-knuckling the top of the mattress now, and she appreciated the feeling that she wasn't in control. It was an entirely new kind of sexy that she never knew she would love so much. Bakugou pulled off his shirt, and by the time he began sliding down his boxers, he met her heady gaze. Her cheeks were flushed, and her hair had feathered out over the pillow in the mess of her orgasm. The expression she wore only served to make him want her more. He gently pushed her knees apart as he settled between her legs. He leaned over her, pressing his palms into the mattress on either side of her chest. He hovered for a moment before he slowly pressed himself into her, thoroughly enjoying the soft moan she elicited once he was all the way there. She was undeniably wet as he began to move his hips with an achingly deliberate pace. He dropped down to his elbows and felt her hips turn upward so he could have a better angle, capturing her lips in the process. After a moment, he felt her hands leave their place to tangle in his hair, but he didn't mind. He had accomplished what he wanted, and he loved the feeling of her pulling on the spikes behind his head. She moaned softly against his lips and appreciated the slow pace. He fit her so well, and he made her forget the world when they made love. Every touch, every kiss, and every husky breath he took had her body responding on its own. It was a strange feeling to not have to think when having sex, but with him, she could turn her mind off and simply enjoy the experience. Her body simply took over. They stayed that way for a while, slowly building up a desperate need for the other as he carefully pulled in and out. Their momentum picked up gradually, and their kisses became sloppier as they picked up on each other's cues that asked for more. She finally wrapped her legs around him, locking her heels behind his back as he gained speed, breaking their kiss so they could pant and moan and look at each other with half-lidded eyes. HNGH. Uraraka was the first to reach the epitome of pleasure. She clenched her jaw as her entire body flexed, and she squeezed around him, forcing him to slow his pace significantly as he fought off the urge to orgasm. He watched as she held her breath and rode it before she reached the peak and broke into a long exhale mixed with a moan. Her heels unlatched from behind his back, and he only had to thrust a few more times before he pulled out and rode out his own orgasm. She didn't open her eyes, but she could hear him panting what sounded like a curse word as he finished over her. Both stayed in place for a while, breathing hard and letting their bodies relax. Uraraka felt the mattress beside her shift, and she knew that he had rolled over onto it to lay on his back, the chilly air of the apartment soothing their sweaty skin. The pair processed the feelings of euphoria in silence, neither having to say a word to express the satisfaction they both felt. Uraraka finally blinked her eyes open and turned her head to see the man beside her. He was looking up at the ceiling, a completely relaxed expression on his face. He was still recovering his breathing, but he sensed her gaze and turned to meet it. His mouth was slanted open, and his eyes didn't look guarded. "Hi," she murmured with a small smile, moving her hand above his head to playfully tickle the hair lining his forehead. He didn't respond, but he closed his mouth and gave her a look she couldn't read. It was an intensely emotional look, one she had never seen him wear before. All she could tell was that it was a good look, almost like he wanted to say something heartfelt. Bakugou welcomed the feeling of tiredness that often came after they had sex. He wanted to close his eyes there and fall asleep to the feeling of her fingers in his hair, and perhaps he would. The intimacy of the moment was comforting and relaxing. She was the only person that had ever made him feel that way. She truly was remarkable in every aspect, so he couldn't bring himself to tell her what he knew he should. He would tell her some other time. For now, he would simply let himself be selfish and enjoy her touch. So that's it for today. If you liked the video, leave a like, subscribe, and activate the notification bell. And if you want to contribute to the entire story being illustrated, just read the information in the description below.